Even though this motor is a lot smaller than the Triumph up there, it sounds good, it's fun to rev out.
Where it's not lacking is power. I mean, this Triumph has a lot of it. So here goes Alex, and there goes me, and there goes me. For me, it feels a little bit like just a much nicer version of the Scrambler that I built for myself, which is cool. Oh, how'd that happen?
Scramblers are some of the best motorcycles on the market. They're cool to look at, they work in most conditions, and they're comfortable to ride. And right here we have two of the coolest Scramblers that you can get. We've got a Triumph Scrambler 1200 XC, and we have a Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled.
So the general concept for a Scrambler is a bike that, you know, you can take on-road, but will be happy doing some off-road miles as well. So you take a street bike basically, throw some dirt parts at it, and you've got a Scrambler. But we have two Scramblers here that represent kind of the two ends of the Scrambler spectrum. We have one that's a little more dirt-oriented, and then another one that's probably a little bit happier staying on the road.
The Scrambler I've brought into the mix is this Triumph Scrambler 1200 XC. It's got a 1200cc parallel twin, 89 horsepower and 81 pound-feet of torque, and this bike weighs a total of about 450 pounds, so it's definitely not very light. Like Alex said, these are road bikes with some mild off-road parts on them, and right now we have them parked with the bars pointed that way because that's how you park Scramblers.
One thing I love about this Triumph is how quickly the clutch grabs. The bite point is right by the handlebar, which makes it very easy to set off, and the clutch is very light and very linear, so this is an overall easy motorcycle to ride. It is definitely on the heavier side, but it's balanced well enough that it's not too bad to be on. And something I love about this Triumph is not only the way that it sounds, but the power. I mean, it's a very torquey bike even from down low, and it pulls all the way to redline. So right now we're on a dirt road, a little bit of gravel, there's a couple little ruts, and realistically, yeah, this is the kind of riding that most people are probably going to do off-road on these types of bikes. You could definitely do more, but they are a bit on the heavy side. It's not like a dedicated dirt bike. It's just not going to be as capable, but at the same time, there's enough travel and enough lug on the tire to be able to hit some dirt roads if you want to take this to go moto camping, or if you're just trying to go a little further out into the wilderness, especially if you live in the mountains like we do.
And here's what I brought today, the 2020 Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled. Now there's a bunch of Scramblers in Ducati's lineup, but the Desert Sled is kind of their Baja rally version. I think it's the coolest looking one. Powering this bike is an 803cc L-twin that makes 73 horsepower and 49 foot-pounds of torque. 6-speed transmission, just like the Triumph, but obviously you're way down on power and massively down on torque on this Ducati when you compare it to the Triumph. Also worth noting, these are both 2020 models, but both these bikes, if you go into a dealership and buy the most current version, they're basically the same bikes, just with different color schemes.
I feel like a total badass on this bike, which is how you should feel riding a Scrambler. They're made to look cool, and I'm kind of in the ideal spot for it, at least in my mind. I'm sitting up super tall, my arms are thrown out really wide, classic Scrambler seating position, but I'm on this dirt road right now, and yeah, this is about as aggressive as I would want to do with this bike. It's heavy, I'm a small guy, I don't want to pick it up myself, but cruising over a washboard like that, not a problem. If I was going to do some serious off-roading, I'd want to get a real dirt bike that's way lighter, easier to pick up, easier to replace, more plastic parts. But for doing stuff like this, both these bikes are extremely capable, and yeah, I just really like the handling characteristics of this Ducati.
461 pounds wet on the Ducati, 455 pounds wet on the Triumph. But numbers aren't always everything, because everybody at our office that has thrown a leg over both of these bikes, everyone's in agreement that the Ducati feels lighter, and I think part of that has to do with the wheel size. You've got a 19-inch front on the Ducati and a 21-inch front on the Triumph, so the Ducati just likes to turn in and tip in a little bit better, makes it feel a little lighter on its toes.
The Triumph Scrambler is working with a set of 45mm inverted Showa forks in the front and a really grippy pair of Brembo brakes that have straight line ABS but not cornering ABS. Suspension travel all the way around 7.9 inches. So that's both for the front and for the rear. And these rear shocks are a very exciting set of fully adjustable Öhlins, which is pretty cool. And right now they're set up for Roma's weight rather than mine, but I want to keep my job, so I'm not going to mess with the settings.
I'm on the pavement now, smooth, grippy road. Now, one thing with this Triumph, even though its suspension is very, very nice, it doesn't really want to lean that much, which is nice for commuting type riding. This bike is very stable, it wants to stay upright, so even in a heavy breeze like what we get on the front range of the Rockies here, you're not really going to get pushed around a ton. So it's nice for everyday riding where you just need to go to work, again, commuter type riding. But if you want to do some canyon carving, it's where it's going to be a little bit more lacking. However, where it's not lacking is power. I mean, this Triumph has a lot of it. So here goes Alex, and there goes me. Again, all the way to redline. This Triumph Scrambler pulls throughout the rev range.
Parked it wrong. See, I actually own a Scrambler. Alex doesn't, so he's you know, he doesn't know how to do it.
Trying to fit in here. Case is teaching me how to do the scrambling. On the Ducati, we've got a 46mm inverted fork. They are adjustable, so 1mm fatter than the forks over there on Case's Triumph. 7.9 inches of suspension travel up front. That's also exactly the same as the Triumph, but going to the rear, KYB rear shock right here. And the Triumph has twin shocks. This is a mono shock, but it's mounted the Ducati way on the left side of the bike. So not centered, but still an adjustable KYB mono shock. 5.9 inches of travel in the rear on this bike, so down 2 inches versus what you get on the Triumph, but definitely just a different suspension setup.
Even though this motor is a lot smaller than the Triumph up there, it sounds good, it's fun to rev out. And I just love the look of this thing. Even these tires too, I mean, they look really knobby, but they're pretty smooth. And that's something you'll feel about riding this bike, is it's a smooth bike. It's not great at highway speeds, but you know, cruising 55, 60 miles an hour on back roads like this, it's soft, it's comfortable, really cushy seat. So you could stay on this for an extended period of time on road and then explore some dirt paths along the way.
The Triumph has a seat height of 33 inches, so throwing a leg over it, it's definitely a decent sized bike, but I can flat foot it at 5'10" without any issues, and it's got a 4.2 gallon fuel tank. Hopping on the Ducati Scrambler, you have a slightly higher seat height of 33.9 inches, but this bike feels narrower, so I wouldn't say it's notably more difficult to get your feet to the ground. This is also a 3.6 gallon fuel tank, so not quite as big of a fuel tank and a slightly higher seat height.
Now, if you are going to take either of these bikes off-road, you have to be mindful of how capable they actually are off-road. So let's go through their off-road capability and their droppability as well. So starting with tires, here on the Ducati, much deeper lugs and just a deeper, overall more aggressive tread pattern than you get here on the Triumph. Both these bikes come from the factory with skid plates, so we're good on that front, but definitely better tires on the Ducati. Now, what about dropping these bikes? Because if you take them off-road, you're gonna end up dropping them if you're riding them properly, and they're pretty bikes. You don't want to mess them up. So let's start with the Ducati here. Obviously both of these have big metal tanks, which is not what you want on a dirt bike, but on the Ducati, these little side panels here are replaceable. So if you mess these up, you're going to be able to order a new piece, slap it on there, and you should be good to go. Of course, that doesn't help if you actually crunch the tank, but at least these side pieces are replaceable. Over here on the Triumph, just one solid piece. It's a super pretty tank. If that goes over on its side, it's probably not going to be a very fun day. Now look at the exhaust. You have a really low mounted exhaust here. Once again, very pretty, but if the bike tips over on the right hand side, that's probably going to be pretty protected. Whereas over here on the Triumph, if you lean this over, these are going to get massively crunched up and it's not going to look too good. All in all, just more parts that are worthy of dropping on this bike. You've got plastic parts on both the front and rear fenders, so easy to clean, easy to replace. Everything's pretty much metal and super solid on the Triumph, so more expensive to replace. These have these cheap looking turn signals that are a little bit floppy, but that's good. If you drop those, these are going to be real cheap to replace. This is probably going to be a little more pricey.
If you're into serious, really difficult dirt biking, you might be thinking, neither of these bikes are serious off-roaders. It's all about the style. And to some degree, you're right. These bikes are largely about the style. So we have to talk a little bit about design. And of course, design is subjective, but still there's some things that we can pick apart. And my opinion's pretty damn good. So get down with it. The Triumph has a lot of beautiful components on it. I mean, every piece that this bike is made out of looks phenomenal. All of this brushed metal, it's got a really nice appearance to it. I would say that the components that this Triumph is built out of look better than most of the components that the Ducati is built out of. These engine covers and parts are more subtle. They don't look bad, but they're not quite as ornate as they are on the Triumph. However, Alex and I both agree that the overall package on the Scrambler Ducati is a better looking bike than the overall package on the Triumph. It's just a bit brighter and a bit more exciting to look at.
Okay, Case refuses to embrace the inner nerd within him, so he is passing all the tech stuff on to me, and we're gonna fire up his Triumph right here to take a look at this TFT display because it looks really good. So it's kind of broken up into 3 different segments here. You've got some dummy indicators along the top, but the screen does a lot. So we've got obviously speedometer, tachometer, trip computers over here on the right hand side that you can cycle through. Also your fuel economy, temperatures. You can also change the look and the brightness. There's different modes for that. So you can change it to a different theme if you want and get a completely different look. There's also different riding modes, so I can hit this M button on the left side and that will toggle you through between a custom rider mode, rain, road, sport, and off-road, and you can customize all those as well, turn ABS and traction control to different settings, change the throttle mapping as well. So there's a lot you can do in the screen. It looks really good. Also, you probably noticed when I started this tech section that I turned the bike on just using my right thumb, and that's because you do have a switchblade key, but you don't actually need to use it. So you just keep this in your pocket. You can start the bike remotely. There's even a little function on here where those lights are green right now, but if you hold, it'll then turn red and then the key is basically locked, so you can't start the bike until you switch that back to green. And of course, you still have your blade style key for locking the front forks.
So all in all, if you're looking for a Scrambler, these are both great options. If you want to save a little bit of dough, you can go with the Ducati. If you want something that really feels like a premium machine with every part you touch of it, Triumph's probably a better option. If you want something to actually take into the dirt, I'd go with this over the Triumph, but like I've been saying, I recommend a full-fledged dirt bike over either of these models.
Unfortunately, style like what you get with these bikes does not come cheap. This Ducati starts at $12,195 and the Triumph is starting at $14,300, but if you get the green fuel tank like what we have, that's an extra $500 for a total of $14,800. So Triumph is notably more expensive, but you also have bigger motor, good amount more power, slightly better tech, but this Ducati is just beautiful and it's even less expensive. And there is a 1200 version of the Ducati Scrambler, so the question is, which one would each of us want to own? What about you, Alex?
As pretty as the Triumph is, I think I'm gonna have to go with the Ducati, and it's really for one reason. I just like the way it handles better.
Yeah, it definitely handles better. It's happier to pitch into corners. And that being said, I would also go with the Ducati because it is less expensive. And my favorite thing about it is just how pretty this bike is. It's gorgeous. Let us know down in the comments below which of these bikes that you guys would prefer. I mean, you really can't go wrong with either one. They both ride really well. They look fantastic. So be sure to give us a little shout in the comments, and we'll catch you guys in the next video.
Next time on For a Few Bucks Less.
All right, so the big plan is to drive from here in Boulder, Colorado, all the way to Ouray, which give or take is about 300 miles. But we also want to figure out which of these three vehicles is the most fuel efficient. So did you fill up, Tommy?
Yes.
Nathan?
Yep.
Yep.
See, that's my problem. When it's full, the needle goes past the thing that says fuel, right? So it's not doing that right now. So I'm thinking it should be about a half a tank.
My temperature gauge on my coolant is going up. My oil temperature gauge is not working, and my battery gauge is also not working.
Oh God, my transmission's overheating. Oh doggies! Oh, it's fine. Just a little oil. Almost smells like wax, and it's burning. Just a little.